Um, we only have one attendee at this stage, but what I will just advise is that this session is being recorded so that we are able to also place the presentation on the website for people who are unable to attend tonight's session and want to see a copy of the information that's being provided. I'd like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on tonight and pay our respects to those past and present. Tonight's session is one of a number of sessions that is being run by Council this week and into the new year, consulting with the Strathfield community about the current financial and asset management challenges facing Strathfield. Unfortunately, the Council has been posting financial deficits over the past few years, and based on updates that we have made to our long-term financial plan, we are forecasting ongoing deficits and a position where the Council could run cash deficits by 2027, which is not a sustainable position for us to be in. As a Council, we have an obligation to our community to make sure we maintain and service the assets and provide important services to the community. In reviewing the financial position, Council has looked at a number of options to address this financial sustainability challenge, which has included the reviewing services that we provide and looking at where we can be more efficient in reducing expenditure. And so in doing so, you may be aware we are currently also consulting with the community on the Connect the Bus service, which we're seeking feedback from the residents on about whether they want to continue or discontinue with that service. We've been looking at other options for also increasing revenues, looking at where we can maximise revenues from our portfolio assets, such as fees and charges and leases of our buildings. We've also reviewed our domestic waste charge, our rate structures, and the level of revenue we collect from rates and who it is collected from throughout the area. Council has been assisted by a consulting group called Morrison Lowe. Greg Smith, one of the lead consultants from Morrison Lowe, is actually with us tonight online, and he's going to facilitate the presentation. There will be plenty of opportunities for questions. What we would ask is if questions can be put in the question and answer box, and if you do have, and if you're not comfortable doing that, you may also raise your hand. But we would prefer for the questions to come through in writing so that we can capture them correctly. I might hand over to Greg now to run us through the presentation.
Thanks, Michael. I'll just bring the presentation up and share it so everyone can see. Whoops. As Michael said, there'll be plenty of opportunities for questions. If we can hold them to the end, that'd be great. But if we can't, then please raise your hand, and one of the guys will stop me from talking. So Morrison Lowe, who are we? We've been around since 2000, and our prime business is working for local government in Australia and New Zealand. And for Strathfield Council, we're working with Council to, I guess, do a bit of an independent review of Council's financial position and looking at options to then close the gap that Michael talked about. So today is to inform you of Council's financial sustainability challenges for now and into the future around assets, operational services improvements, and then, of course, the special rate variation option the Council's considering. So this is to provide you with an opportunity to ask questions and, I guess, to better understand the challenges facing Council and the reasons for the actions and solutions the Council is looking at. And hopefully by the end of the meeting, you'll be more informed to then form a view around these issues and provide some feedback to Council, which Council is looking for. So today's presentation is going to be focused on Council's current financial position, along with, I guess, the financial obligations of councils more generally, looking at some specific operational improvements and resource needs, looking at the change to the domestic waste management charge and income transfers, looking at the level of investment in required investment in assets, proposed rating structure changes to be a little bit more fairer and equitable, and then some couple of special rate variation options that council's been looking at. And of course, what follows then, what's the impact on ratepayers? And then finally, just a little bit about the special rate variation process and the next steps that will follow. Today's forum is not intended to be talking specifically about council's strategic and operational plans, and it's not about making a decision whether council is to apply for an SRV. It's about providing information to the community. Under the Local Government Act of New South Wales, all councils in New South Wales have an obligation to be financially sustainable over the longer term, which basically means councils aren't spending more than they're earning. And to achieve this, it really means having fully funded operating position, making sure there's sufficient cash reserves available to fund things like the capital works program, particularly asset renewal program, and the maintenance of those assets to ensure that they are fit for purpose. They also need adequate resources to ensure that they meet the ongoing compliance obligations of councils. Being financially sustainable isn't really negotiable, because if councils choose to not be financially sustainable, the Office of Local Government have stepped in before and then put a particular practices and people in place to then deal with that. Council, in looking at the sustainability issues and challenges, whether they be financial or assets or services, want to be mindful of and focus on a few of the following key objectives. One is to minimise the impact on ratepayers, particularly residential ratepayers, with over 70% of the rate burden sitting with the residential ratepayers. To create a fair and equitable rating and charging structures, ensuring assets are fit for purpose, delivering core services that are consistent right across the council area, and correct, I guess, the past 3 years of operating deficits and the forecasted operating deficits going forward. For the general fund operation, you can see here it's a $30 million business, but the majority of the rates, the majority of the income comes from rates. And of that $20 million in rates, $14 million is from the residential ratepayers, and the balance is from the business ratepayers. When councils reviewed their financial position and looked at the forecast going forward, you can see there that since 2020 to 2022, so those first 3 years, their actual results, they are operating deficits of 1.3, 5.5 and $6 million. And then when we forecast forward, that operating deficit position only gets worse. And as Michael indicated, as a result of that operating deficit position, council is likely to run out of cash in about 2027 or 2028. So council needs to do something, because they can't afford to run operating deficits into the future. I guess the question is, why is council, and not just this council, a number of councils around the states, around New South Wales, why aren't they sustainable? Well, firstly, you've got a rate peg, which means that the increase in rates each year are pegged or limited and determined by IPART. So for this year, it was 3.5%, for 23-24, sorry, it's 3.7%. And previously it was 0.7%, but then the government made a decision to allow councils to increase their rates a little bit more. The other real issue that sits with councils is this cost shifting issue, where the state government either transfers or creates compliance responsibilities and impose them on local government. Things like the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee, where every council in New South Wales needs to set up a committee. They need to have some independent people sit on it, and council's got to fund that. So that's, you know, new money that council's got to find to put that in place. You've got increases in emergency services levy. Cyber security is a real issue for councils at the moment, and they need to protect your information, your private information. So we know that the Audit Office is certainly looking at councils to ensure they've got those procedures and practices in place and resourcing. The other area is the Crown lands in terms of council having care and control. There's a whole range of management regimes that they need to have in place. Also, we've got the current environment, which council, you know, has gone through and undertaken this operational financial review, and then part of that review has identified that the assets are in a worse condition, I guess, than they were previously. And you can see there that there's a significant increase in the backlog, or the amount of work that's required to bring those assets back up to an acceptable standard. And council's forecasting an ongoing operating deficits over the 10 out of the 10 years. And that's got to do with those things that I just talked about, plus the current environment of high inflation, low rate increases, significant increases in wages that are coming, and materials and contracts. So all councils in, I guess, across Australia are really under pressure at the moment. For Strathfield Council, there's been some increase in services in recent times. We know the local connector bus has been there, into operation, and as Michael indicated, council's considering reviewing that. That costs about $1.3 million a year to operate. There's additional costs in synthetic fields that have been put in place over the recent times. Also, what additionally impacts on the operating costs is the creation of new assets, or the upgrading of new assets. You can see some examples there, like the park upgrades in Strathfield and significant upgrades in playgrounds right across the council area. These new assets, they therefore need more money to maintain them and more money to renew them through the depreciation. So that's an additional cost burden that's been placed on council. So what's council done? So when the council come into the recent council, new council, they undertook a operational and financial review, and as a result of that, they are now considering a range of options, which we will talk to in more detail now. One of the things that council looked at was to see if there were any areas in the core service area that there could be some savings. And to generate savings in service areas is you've got to reduce the cost, and the main way you reduce costs is to really decrease the number of people. However, the feedback from the community has been for a period of time that they're satisfied with the current level of core services. So council was of the view that those core service levels need to be maintained going forward. Through a improvement process, council identified some 36 operational improvements. There's a number here that we've highlighted. One is the proposed review of the operation of the Strathfield connector bus, which we spoke about, improved income from the driving range and property leases, the review of fleet, you know, whether they need all the vehicles and plant they've currently got and the hire charges, the use of LED lighting that will drive energy savings, and to have a look at off-street parking and to see whether there's an opportunity to extend that. So when as a result of that process, council identified an initial net benefit of about $1.3 million in 23-24, and that will increase to about $2.5 million by year 10. Also, council has decided not to progress with the leisure centre project, and if they had done, there would have been a further additional operating costs of $1.5 million per year, plus loan repayments of $2.4 million per year for the next 20 years. So that's a significant amount of money that council would have to find, and effectively the ratepayers would have to pay. The other thing council is doing, they've looked at the domestic waste charge, and they're proposing to decrease the domestic waste charge from $7.95 to $550, a saving of $245 per year. In doing that, they are able to still provide the same level of service that's currently there. So there will be no reduction in service. What it means is that council will transfer something in the order of $4 million from the domestic waste income to general rates, to residential general rates. And effectively, the decrease in the domestic waste management charge will offset largely the increase in the rates charged for those residential ratepayers. And to do that, council needs to increase their rates by about 20%, which is a component of the special rate variation, but that piece only relates to the domestic waste management. The other thing that council want to do is create or have a more equitable rating structure. So there's a few things that they're proposing to do there. One is to introduce minimum rates, and that better aligns the service levels provided to residents, particularly those that are in units, and help rebalances the rate structure in terms of fairness going forward. Just a little bit about the rating structure. So council currently uses a base rating system with an additional ad valorem charge. This means all ratepayers are charged the same base amount plus an amount based on their ad valorem or their rate in the dollar using the land value. An ad valorem is a charge based on the value of the unimproved land, and that's land without any improvements, houses and things like that. Whereas the minimum rate system is based on land value. Basically, anyone who has a land value that is under a certain dollar amount threshold, they pay the minimum rate. Everyone pays the same minimum rate. If that land value is higher than that, then the rates are paid based on the ad valorem. This ensures that residents who live in units that have low-level land values but use just as many council services are paying their fair share of rates. And the minimum rate structure provides better long-term financial sustainability from growth in units and apartments. So that minimum rate structure is one of the legs of improving fairness and equity. We've spoken about the domestic waste in terms of better aligning that. And then the third part is council's proposing to increase, to include some business subcategories, which are 2 industrial areas and the CBD for Strathfield. And this is really about the redistribution of some of the cost burden away from the residential onto these other subcategories of rates. Again, trying to have a much fairer rating system now and into the future. So the other thing council has done, they undertook a comprehensive review of all the asset data and undertook some detailed analysis. And what they found was that the asset condition has worsened since 2019. And basically the backlog ratio has increased from 0.25% to 4.2%. There's an industry target around 2%, so you can see council is above that. Just by way of example, we're showing roads here. So in the previous information provided, that what that's saying is all the roads were in condition 3 or better, condition 3, 2 or 1, where condition 3 is satisfactory, 2 is very good, and 1 is basically new assets. So all the assets were in pretty good order. However, after the assessment that was undertaken, you can see now nearly 30% of those road assets are now in condition 4 and 5, which means some are not fit for purpose, and council needs to address those, otherwise they'll deteriorate at an exponential rate. In order to try and address that backlog issue over the longer term, council needs to spend about $11.8 million a year to improve the asset conditions and to try and reduce that backlog down to 3.1% as a target. So having done all that, council is still needs to spend $11.8 million per year. Council's still forecasting operating deficits, so there's another response that's needed. What council is proposing is to implement the savings, transfer the $4 million from domestic waste income to residential waste. And as I said earlier, that's largely going to be offset by the transfer, but by law, council is required to actually apply for a special rate variation to make that transfer. They plan to spend $11.8 million on investment in new assets. They're looking to increase the minimum rates over 4 years, starting at $900 in 23-24 and increasing by $100 a year to $1,200 in 26-27. They want to introduce those 3 business subcategories, the 2 industrial and the CBD, and they're proposing an additional special rate variation of 52.4% accumulated over 4 years. So council looked at a number of options, but the 2 options we're going to talk about tonight is a special rate variation over 1 year and a special rate variation over 4 years, which is council's preferred option. So you can see here that the 1 year permanent SRV option would see an increase in your rates with the rate peg of 3.7%, the domestic waste component of 20% or 20.3%, and that additional special rate variation at 50%. So when you add all those up, that increase in year 1 is 74%. And then when you apply the estimated rate peg for the next 3 years, you can see by year 4, the compounded increase is 88.3%. The reason we've done that is to compare it to the year 4 option, which is this one here. Again, in this information, you can see the rate peg is still there at 12% compounded over 4 years. Council would apply that regardless of whether they are successful with an SRV or not. The domestic waste of 20%, again, that's transfer from your domestic waste, reduces your charges, increases your rates. And then the 4-year option is 10% in year 1, 5% year 2, then 2 lots of 15%, which when you compound it, it equates to 52%, 52.7%. Then when you add up all the increases for each year and you compound them across, you can see that the increase is 99.8%. But as I've said, 42% of that, it relates to domestic waste and the rate peg. The other thing, so you guys know, is that the 20% will be all applied to the residential category, in year one, the 10% of the additional SRV in year one will be all applied to the business categories and subcategories to help rebalance that rating structure in year one. And council's looking to review that each year to see whether they should be putting more from residential into that business category going forward. So what does it mean? And what's the impact on ratepayers? Given that the 70% of the ratepayers will be on minimum rates, we might just focus on this, the bottom one. So you can see that the 584 is the average of those rates that would go onto a minimum using the old rating structure. So when you add that number to the 795, which is the current domestic waste charge, it's a figure of $1,379. And when you go across to 26, 27, and you then add the 1,200 and the 550, it's $1,750. So the increase over that 4-year period is in the order of $1.70 or $1.80 a week, or about $93 a year. So yes, it is an increase, but for the majority of the ratepayers, it's not, a significant increase. For business, the top one is all the businesses. They're currently at $4,000 for 22-23, and you can see over the 4-year period there'll be an increase, nearly double, I guess, in terms of all business. And for the industrial area, industrial or proposed industrial subcategories, there's a similar story there as well in terms of the increase from now and then to 26, 27. This is your council rate notice. It's just to highlight here to say that the purple area is where you will see an increase as a result of the special rate variation. So if you were, one of those 70%, that will go up slightly, go up around 20%, and this one over here will come down by 245. So in most cases, the total amount in year one only, there shouldn't be a significant increase or change. How does Strathfield compare to other councils? You can see there that the residential rate for 22-23 is really low compared to other councils. And then when you add the domestic waste charge, it brings it up a bit, and it's still at the bottom end of the average rate, including domestic waste. So, I guess it's part of the reason why council wants to restructure the domestic waste going forward to make that more equitable. And you can see there that an amount of 550 lines up pretty well for most of those other councils. And again, the business average rate for 22-23 is off to the side there. Again, it's sort of in the middle of the pack, except for Hunters Hill. So if council is successful with the SRV application and applies all of it, they will return to a small surplus position by 2027, and it's estimated they'd remain that way for the next out until 2033. The other thing that would happen is that the cash position of council would be maintained and improved over that period of time. So that gives council financial capacity to deal with those unexpected issues. And I guess particularly towards the latter end of this period, there'd be more funds available to address the backlog issue on assets if that was a priority for council. What will the money be spent on? I think pretty clear, maintaining and improving council's or the community's assets, ensuring that they are in a satisfactory condition for community use. maintaining the current core service levels right across the LGA to ensure that, Strathfield is attractive, a place to visit and live. And finally, to achieve financial sustainability and having that sound cash position now and into the future. Who approves the special rate variation? IPART, the Independent Price and Regulatory Tribunal, makes that decision. It also makes, all the pricing decisions in relation to the state government agencies as well. So there is this process that all councils have got to go through, and then there's this criteria that councils need to address, and these are to demonstrate the need for increase in rates, to evidence that the community consultation and awareness of council's plans have been provided to the community, process to exhibit all relevant council documents to the public, assessing a reasonable impact on ratepayers as they go through that process, and a history of well-documented council productivity improvements and cost containment strategies. And council has done a pretty good job in going through that process. So what are the next steps? Currently, council is consulting with the community, and that consultation will finish on the 31st of January. Then council will review the feedback, and then they'll make a decision on whether they apply or not apply for an application. Should they apply, council would need to make the application. It needs to be submitted by the 3rd of March. About back end of March, April, IPART will consider the application and will also further consult with the community. And at the same time, council will ensure that this information is in their annual delivery plan and resourcing strategy, so that the community can see what's there and they can have further input into that process. IPART would make a decision around May, and if they said yes, then council's got to take that decision to its June meeting, and at that meeting, council can decide whether they implement all or part of that special rate variation increase. How to have your say? As I said at the start, and I know that the mayor and the councillors are online, is that council is looking for feedback from the community. It's important for council to get that information. So all the information in facts on the website, that's the source of truth. So all the information we use, it's on the website. This is our 3rd information session. And then there's a range of pop-up stalls that have been had, and there's a couple of more to come. At the same time, there's an online engagement portal where you can undertake a survey, you can leave a submission, or you can just write an email to council or send a letter. There's plenty of ways that you can provide feedback, and council's happy to take it however you want to provide it. So thank you, and happy to answer some questions.
Thanks, Greg. Just doing one check-in with Mary, who's online. Did you have any questions about that presentation that Greg's just run us through? Sorry, we don't seem to be able to hear you if you are talking.
Mary, were you able to put your question in the chat, or just advise if you didn't have any questions in the chat?
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
thanks, Mary. We can see that you've got no questions. Okay. Well, that really draws the end of the presentation tonight. We'll make this available online. I'd just like to thank Greg for running us through that, and we'll put a copy of this on the website. And thanks to the staff who have also attended for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.